Welcome to the Waves Business Coaching Podcast, where you can learn how to grow as a leader, inspire your team, and optimize the operations in your organization. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, and this week on the podcast, I interview Morgan Crabtree from Chick-fil-A Inc. Morgan is someone who I worked with at Chick-fil-A, and in her role, she has had to give and receive a lot of feedback, good and really tough feedback. And so I interview her to talk about how feedback is a gift and how you can better give and receive feedback as a gift in your role in your business. If you want to learn more about how you can bring the best out of your team in your organization, be sure to go to wavesbusinesscoaching.com, which is linked in the episode description. I would love to equip you with the tools and the resources to optimize your business and give you peace of mind as a business leader. Let's dive into my interview with Morgan Crabtree. Morgan, thank you so much for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Tell me a little bit about yourself, or I know about you. Tell our audience a little bit about you.
I was like, what different thing do you want to know about me that I haven't already shared with you? So my entire career has been at Chick-fil-A, whether in the restaurant or at Chick-fil-A Inc. But holistically, I've spent about 12 plus years with Chick-fil-A. I came to a restaurant really out of desperation in college, as a means to an end, and drank the lemonade, as they say, and kind of stuck around, But I spent about 4.5 years in a Chick-fil-A restaurant in Austin, Texas. Served as team member, leader, training director, you name it. Did a little bit of everything. Eventually found my way into the training department, kind of out of a soul search I was doing on the other end of college. I had graduated with a degree in applied learning and development and very obviously knew I did not belong in a classroom. After an elementary gym class, I said, I will handle my own children. I just can't do it forever for everybody else's. And so I found my way into a part-time training role at Chick-fil-A Inc. The certified trainer role, is probably many of our listeners have heard of, but did that for a bit of time. Met my husband through that route at a grand opening. I don't know if I should say that. It's a bit scandalous, I guess, but met my husband that way and met a fellow trainer who eventually introduced me into a part-time role called the Chick-fil-A trainer role, where I'm sure, as you know, got to train operators, restaurant leaders, and just fell in love with the growth and development aspect of that. I pretty much got hooked on Chick-fil-A at that point, knew I wanted a career with the organization, but at that point hadn't worked outside of the restaurant, had no practical experience in a classroom, and so knew I needed something else to kind of kickstart my career. Around 2015, the Now Talent Development Program came into the picture and applied on a whim. I was a week out from getting married and got a call that I was selected to join the talent development program. So I moved my West Coast husband all the way across the country and moved to Atlanta for a shot at a role. And so I came in with like 16 other individuals hoping to get a job at Chick-fil-A and had an expiration date, as a lot of people know, and did a little bit of everything. But I think my favorite roles while in the program were serving our certified trainers and our licensed program leaders and getting to really partner with the other people. And sorry about that.
You're good.
The other people in the program. I was so hopeful he'd be quiet.
It's okay.
But getting to partner with other individuals and learn about myself and in the organization in a way that I really hadn't got to do before through project management roles and just other leadership and development aspects. But I officially left the program in 2018 and transitioned into my first full-time role at Chick-fil-A Inc., where I stepped into talent acquisition. Had you asked me if that would be my first step out of TDP, I probably would have laughed at you. HR was nowhere in the picture that I had painted for myself. I had pretty much decided I want to be in training. I want to serve operators. I want to serve the restaurant very directly. And how naive I was to think that I couldn't do that. I had some very pointed conversations, and it's very, I think, fortunate that this conversation centers around feedback, as I've received some very pointed feedback in my exit out of TDP to say, hey, like, you need to ask the right questions and essentially quit being so dense and explore your options. So I did, stepped into a screener role and served in that role for about 9 months, where I was screening videos and interviewing individuals interested in the roles I had served in. Um, like I said, it was about 9 months, and then I was promoted into an advisor role where I got to lead selection for our talent development program, partner with current participants, and learn what it was like to steward a selection process. About a year into that, I was promoted into my next role as lead advisor, where I got to steward the selection process for all development programs at Chick-fil-A, help steward and lead program participants in their journeys, as well as lead kind of the functional process for our field talent staff and that selection behind the scenes. But I left that role recently. I served in talent for about 5 years and recently left that role in September of last year.
Yeah.
Now serving non-traditional restaurants, where I get to partner with operators and helping to really bring our brand to places where people experience life day to day. And so it's
Yeah.
really, really cool to see the brand from a different perspective. It's hard and it's different, but it's exactly where I want to be.
So this is funny. I thought about this as we started this conversation. Morgan, you interviewed me for the talent development program at Chick-fil-A, and
Mm-hmm.
now I get to interview you here on this podcast. So
That's
life has come full circle. Yeah, it feels different on the other end. How does it feel for you? Now, so you've had multiple roles that were very feedback heavy,
mm-hmm.
whether it was in the restaurant, in TDP, especially in your role as like a screener and a lead advisor, where that specifically you're giving a lot of feedback. Obviously, in TDP, you got to receive a lot of feedback, and in your current role. Why do you think feedback is so important in an organization?
I mean, I think the obvious is probably personal growth and development, but I think if you're thinking larger scale for an organization, you've got growth, change, innovation, development, you name it, right? I think it is so, so essential for change. We can all probably live in our own heads one point or another, and I could walk away thinking, man, I'm awesome. I'm the greatest licensing lead on
Yeah,
the planet, whereas my peers could have a completely different perspective or thought on my performance. And I would never know unless the door was open for them to share what needed to be shared for change. Um, and I think, living in your own head can often be isolating and very, very often clouded or inflated, kind of like what I hinted at there a minute ago. But I think feedback just ultimately breeds change. It cultivates strength amongst your partnerships, integrity, and trust in relationships. I mean, the list can go on, right? Um, I think when you open the door for feedback and establish a culture of feedback, you're going to have people who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. They'll challenge appropriately. They'll share ideas freely in the organization. And you're going to have innovation and you're going to discover different perspectives within the organization. But I think most of all, and I think of where I'm at currently, right? You hear the words excellence and perfection a lot. Excellence and perfection. We don't necessarily strive for perfection, but excellence is essentially required. But I think when you open the door for feedback and you allow, accept, and give feedback, people will try and fail. They're going to have perseverance and tenacity to try again. And I think that's so, so important, because without your innovation, you're going to be kind of stagnant. Um, and we've seen that, like our team members standing outside in COVID with card readers on spatulas, right? Innovation to serve our guests in different ways, right? That's an
yeah,
isolating example. But if the operator had come out and said, wow, Jacob, that's really dumb. Spatulas belong in the kitchen, when they were innovating and thinking of new ways to serve our guests, I don't think we would have been a leading brand through the chaos that was 2020 to
Yeah.
2022, right? Just very different.
So you're talking a lot about a leader receiving feedback and
Mm-hmm.
like the importance of, if I'm a business leader, I'm a business owner, creating a culture in the restaurant to receive
Mm-hmm.
feedback. So you talked about opening the door for feedback, and you're going to have people who will give very candid feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That is me. I am that person who the second you open the door, I am not afraid to speak up. I have a question about someone that's not me though. How do you open the door for people who are not like me, who are not like, sweet, I'm happy to give you the tough feedback? How do you
Mm-hmm.
open the door for maybe the introverts in the room who wouldn't typically speak up because their voice is also important?
So are you asking like what I would recommend for people who are timid in giving feedback?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
not necessarily the timid people who give the feedback. How, as a business leader, if you have those people in your organization, how can you open up a loop for them to give feedback? Like if they're not going to speak up openly.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think it comes down to a few different things, right? You really, really have to establish a culture of listening first. And you have to have holistic involvement if
Hmm.
you're going to establish a culture of feedback. I think it can be so easy to say, like, I noticed this pain point or this roadblock, and I'm going to go to Jacob and tell him what's wrong. And you could probably identify a laundry list of things that's wrong every single day. But if you're the only person critiquing or complaining or doing, you're probably casting a wide net of criticism within your organization. But I think one, buy in, culture of listening,
That's good.
establishing a culture of listening from the top down and bottom up. Holistic involvement is so, so important, right?
Yeah.
I can't be the only one giving feedback. And, I may not be the ideal person for my first day team member to give feedback to on the organization. It may be their team leader that's working with them side by side, they have a relationship and a partnership with. And then you've got to kind of create this cyclical system where feedback is received and acted on, because action is so, so important when it comes to feedback. I think being able to say, like, hey, like, let's first hear the problems within the organization. Let's see what our pain points are. Now let's create that system that works for us. And whether that's team members go to team leaders go to managers, managers go to directors, directors go to operator or leader of the restaurant, to use a Chick-fil-A model, and say, like, hey, we're going to receive this feedback no matter what. If you want it to be face to face, if you want it to be anonymous, no matter what it is. And then we're going to funnel it down and find our three biggest priorities, if you will. And then we're going to attack them together. But I want to hear what you're saying. And I think that's going to be the most important piece of opening the door, is saying, I'm listening. And maybe you don't even want me to do anything about it, but I'm going to hear you and I'm going to thank you for it. And then we're going to move forward however you see fit, versus me trying to create solutions every single time.
I think that's good because feedback, to make people feel heard, you have to do something. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's action oriented. And so just being like, hey, thanks so much for sharing this. We're going to do nothing about what you just said, it
Yeah.
doesn't show them that you're listening. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do something every single time
Mm-hmm.
someone brings you feedback, but
Yeah.
you have to have that system in place where if, hey, 75% of the people in my business are giving me this feedback, we got to change something to let them
We
know
got
that
to
we
do
care
something.
about what they say. Right.
And I think the last thing I'll add on that too is, like, I think a crucial, very tactical thing that you have to do if you're going to open this loop is training people how to give and receive feedback.
Mm.
I think oftentimes feedback gets a bad rap. Like, it gets a really bad rap because we approach it in a way of, like, Jacob's complaining about me and he's saying bad things about me, or he's attacking me. When he's approaching me with this feedback, is just like any other skill. It's a skill to
Yeah.
give well crafted feedback to honor the person that you're talking to, or the system or the business, whatever it is. But you have to train your team on how to give that in a really practical way that works for them. And I know we'll talk about that, but I think that's just something really important to walk away with. Like, you can't just say let's open the door to feedback, but you've got to say, hey, let's practice it and let's give it. And we've got to be open to it.
I mean, let's go there. You and I both worked in a program that was around training
Yeah.
where, I reflected recently that I went into TDP thinking I am really good at giving feedback, and I'm really good at receiving feedback because I don't take things personally. And then was introduced to like 100 feedback models and
Mhm.
realized that I might not have been as good at feedback as I originally thought. So, what is a good way to train people to give good feedback?
Yeah. I love that you said you weren't good at this because, man, I thought I was too. And then I realized I was way too nice when I came into my first role out of TDP. It's different giving feedback to people you have a camaraderie with versus
Hmm.
people that you may report up to or
Yeah.
you met for an hour that you've interviewed. And I realized coming out of a few conversations initially in my recent role that I was revisiting a lot of conversations because I didn't want to hurt their feelings or tarnish their
Mm.
relationship. And they were like, I'm a little confused. Was I turned down or what can I do? And I'm like, oh, that's uncomfortable. I never want to have to do that again. Right. And so I think it depends on the situation. To answer your question, I think it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
If I have somebody who's approaching me, asking me to evaluate or asking me for feedback, they've already opened the door and shown me that they are ready and receptive to
Yep.
receive feedback. And so I usually like to approach that conversation by having that person start. So I may even say, hey, Jacob, like, you were leading the conversation. Tell me what worked well, what went really, really well for you. And I want you to start there on purpose because, like I said, we can create a laundry list of things we're bad at or that we
Right.
thought went wrong. And then I asked them to give me maybe 3 to 4 things that they felt they could do a little bit better. And oftentimes this shows me a lot, or tells me a lot rather, about their self-awareness.
Hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, they've got things that I've already got on my list to talk about. So I think it lessens the blow and kind of breaks down the barrier for that conversation to be had. Um, and something I didn't mention at the beginning, but I think goes without saying, always make sure feedback is fact-based, right?
Yeah.
I think even in those conversations, whether it's with candidates or a peer, we'll often say, well, I did this. And I'm like, well, what can you practically do in response to that? And if you can't, it's probably just a criticism rather than something that can
Yep.
actually be actionable or fixed. Um, but I think on the flip side of that, if I am approaching someone with feedback, I just ask the question of, hey, Jacob, is it okay if I give you some feedback on what I observed or perceived from this time together? And I'm preparing every single time, whether it's them asking me for feedback or me approaching someone with feedback. I'm preparing 3 to 4 things on both sides, the positive
Yeah.
and the constructive, so that I know exactly what I want to hit. And then I'm giving those action steps of like, here's some things that I saw that have helped in the past, but I'm going to put the onus on you to continue that growth. You've probably heard me say these things to candidates a million times,
Yep.
but I think in both approaches, like, I try to honor the person no matter what, and the preparation they put in and the time they spent. And so I think as long as they're open to it, I'll proceed with the conversation. But sometimes people say no, and you have to live with the fact that they don't want to hear what it is. And so I think those have worked well in the past for me.
I know you're an Office fan. Are you a Parks and Rec fan?
Yes.
You made me laugh with the candidates like not knowing if if they were being denied or not, with like the Chris
Yeah.
Traeger breaking up with Ann Perkins and like, wait, did he just break up with me? That was like the nicest breakup ever. um that's fun. So in your previous role, you had to give a lot of tough feedback. What you
Uh-huh.
just talked about, like how you went about that.
Mhm.
Um in a lot of tough feedback because you're interviewing literally hundreds of candidates
Mm-hmm.
and maybe accepting less than half, I would say, is a safe number.
Yeah.
Um, from start to finish, it's like for sure less than half.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and with that, like with someone you said like, I don't want to be too nice and ruin this relationship and stuff. I think there's business owners and business leaders listening who are in that position of like, hey, I need to give this tough feedback, but I don't want to hurt the relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
I know something you and I both heard at Chick-fil-A is feedback is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And when we approach it this way, it helps us give it in a way, if you think about it like a gift of like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm giving this to you to help you.
Yeah.
Like you never give a gift to someone that's like, haha, gotcha. Like, open it up and it's a rock and, whatever. But so approaching feedback as a gift and giving it to someone to help them, I think is a good mindset to approach it with. Like
Yeah, for sure.
for business owners and leaders listening, like coming from someone who said you had a hard time with those conversations, how do you approach that tough feedback that is necessary? Because it's a really tough place to be in.
It is. It is. I think I kind of alluded to it, I think, in my last answer there, but and maybe it's just me. Maybe I overthink, the meme where it's like an introvert has to make an important phone call and it's a 5-second phone call. An hour leading up to the call, you're like, and you're reciting
That's
every single
great.
thing that you have to say. And then you get on the phone and the person doesn't pick up and you're like, yes, didn't happen today.
Yeah.
That's me all day long. And it's never as bad as I think it's going to be. But what has helped me? So from this perspective, I will always say, bullet point it out, prepare what you have to say,
Yeah.
literally think through what it is that you're trying to communicate.
Mhm.
Sounds so simple and probably very cliche, but I promise you, if you go into this conversation trying to wing it, you're probably going to put your foot in your mouth and you may
Yep.
have bigger problems coming out of that.
Yep.
And so writing it down, bulleting it out kind of helps you keep your train of thought very linear, but also keep it fact based. And then I think what helps in that situation is it allows me to tie it to practical behaviors that can improve those things and say, like, hey, I'm giving you this to help improve your growth and your development. And as a byproduct, you're going to see a return on your business, right? And the growth in your business because you're learning new business skills. And now my food cost line has improved, and that's awesome. Um, but I think it's very simple. Just prepare, practice it, say it out loud. Every facilitator knows this.
Yeah.
Like, say it out loud. It's going to come out different than what's actually written on paper every single time.
And you said something I want to reemphasize, it being fact-based, and whether you struggle to give good feedback or not,
Mm-hmm.
like fact-based, specific, like
Oh,
identify what you want to give feedback on, clarify why it's important, and then create a plan for them. Like that's that second half of feedback we talked about at the beginning when receiving feedback, but also give
yeah.
them hey, what do you need to do moving forward from this conversation?
Clear, kind, transparent, come in with leading questions. I
Yeah.
think a lot of time people are just like, what'd you see? And if you can lead them into the things that they saw and go, oh, wow, I see how that may have been communicated, or I see how that may have come off. We live in our own heads. Like I said,
Yep.
it's clouded, right? But clear is kind, clear is kind, clear is kind,
That's right.
um, and concise, right? I told you I got fumbled many times in my initial attempts to give feedback to
Yeah.
people because I was like, well, you're awesome. And here's the feedback sandwich. And I would leave out the meat of that sandwich by being like, you kind of didn't really do all those things that right because you were kind of doing these things. What? As opposed to saying, hey, you showed up really well in your communication, but your business acumen is not where it needs to
Yeah.
be a competitive candidate for this program.
Yep.
Short and sweet.
To the point, clear.
Yeah.
Clear
Mhm.
is kind. I love that.
Yep.
Morgan, thank you so much. You're someone who I learned a ton of how to give good feedback. We joked beforehand that I am on the harder side of don't have a hard time finding something wrong, but I need more people who are really good at giving feedback in my life like you are. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. It was so fun and always great to see you.
Thanks, Morgan.
Thanks.
Thank you so much to Morgan for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Morgan is someone who has really helped me give and receive feedback well. And feedback is such an important skill as a business owner and leader. And so I just really want to thank Morgan for being on the show today and for helping us all give and receive better feedback as a gift. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. For more free tools and resources on how you can grow your organization, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. If you are a business leader and you want to help bring the best out of your team, visit our website at wavesbusinesscoaching.com, which is linked in the episode description. If you want a free plan of how you can optimize your business, be sure to take my business report, which is also linked in the episode description. In just 10 minutes, you'll get a diagnosis and plan to help optimize your business. Be sure to click the link in the episode description to take my business report. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Take care.